Factorio is pretty awesome, but it's also pretty ugly. So what if we had a way to fix that? What if we could just make everything disappear? Yep, that's right. We're putting a bag over the Factory's head. Now before I start, I have to clarify this run is not because I deleted the entities folder, no way. But actually, I did try that and it didn't work. Instead, I ran a script to replace everything with a transparent version of itself. I then ran it again with lower, or is it higher transparency? So whenever you see footage that looks like this, it's using Factorio's replay feature. Figured it would be useful to highlight the absolute mess I made. It's either this or Subway Surfers to keep things visually interesting. Now, the goal here is simple. Launch a rocket in this perfectly normal Factorio playthrough. No major restrictions, though a couple minor additions will be explained as they come up. That means I can max out the resource sliders to save time, but to balance it out I kept biters on. Plus I just had to know if they were hidden. With that, let's get started, and wow, either we got incredibly unlucky or the ore patches are entities. Maxing the resource sliders might have been a bad call since the large patches seem to have formed an ore turducken. Fortunately, the UI on the right shows expected resource values, so I can just move the drill around until it shows a pure resource. This allowed me to place the first drill for Burner City. It wouldn't run for long with nearby fuel, so I had to seek out a bit of coal to kickstart it, and would you look at that, the rocks are visible. Usually rocks in forests are like finding a needle in a haystack, but it's hard to miss these. Guess that's one benefit of invisible entities. I just had to navigate this invisible maze to get there. Whatever I did to anger an all-powerful mime, I'm sorry, please let me out of here. Anyway, after brute forcing my way through that maze, I made my way back to my drill and... wait, where was it? I swore I left it somewhere around here and... there it is. To help next time, I left a sign, the status icons. Ordinarily you don't want to see these, they mean you ran out of fuel, which it still does mean here, but now it has an advantage. If I actively avoid feeding something, I can use it as a marker. With that in mind, I built a small burner city, huge burner city, left an unfed furnace, and built some coal drills. I didn't have everything for automation quite yet, but I felt like getting power out of the way while I was still thinking about coal, so I went and did that. Lining up the boilers with the water pump was awkward because this was the first time I had to line up anything. At least the power lines are visible though. Literally just the lines. This was great for showing if the line was broken somewhere along the way, but not much else. Fortunately, that's all I needed right now, an unbroken line of power to power my lab while I built Burner City. It was much easier to find Burner City this time around, but I was getting worried my compulsive need of fuel would take over, so I thought of a better idea. Or as I phrased it, a cleverer one. And no, this idea is not to use alt mode. That's this little button right here, and I imagine someone has been screaming at me this entire time to press it. Alt mode shows what is being crafted, so I ended up banning it. I haven't banned the subscribe button though, so feel free to press that if you don't want to miss out on some more dumb stuff. Thanks for 5k by the way, it really meant a lot. Instead, I'm in my own alt mode. If you look at these haphazardly fed drills, you can see some coal drop by the sides. This is a downside of dropping single items to feed furnaces, but by doing it intentionally, we can not only mark where things are, but what things are. Plus, there's absolutely no way this can go wrong without a compulsion to pick things up. Unless, of course, you build something over it, which clears the ground automatically, but yeah, no way it can go wrong. With Burner City done and easy to navigate, I was ready to build the base. I almost went with my standard ghost building to plan things, and why? Why did I generally consider that one? Don't mind me, just gotta grab my invisible tape measure, like, what did I expect to accomplish there? Instead, I used the drop items again. One belt on the ground to mark where I want the furnace lane, and that's all I really needed. It seemed like I was above an iron patch too, so I picked a random spot and was good to go. A perfectly placed furnace lane directly above a stone iron mix. I was already regretting the maxed resources. Just one quick fix, and then I could begin the first real build of the run, the smelting lane. There were little boxes here to highlight entities, which was nice, but the directional arrows were a godsend, especially when it came to inserter placements. And only when it came to inserter placements, because it doesn't affect belts. The boxes guaranteed the inserters were next to something, and the arrows guaranteed they're probably facing the right way. Look, you can build stuff wrong even when there's textures. I'm never going to trust inserter direction. By the end of the lane, I even came up with a new idea on how to keep track of the buildings better, leaving the machines unpowered. Wait, that's the original idea, but just with power. Oh well, it's still helpful. So long as I resisted the urge to power them, inserters were partially visible. Unfortunately, this run revealed how truly compulsive I was. I was hoping to place all of the inserters at once, then power them at the end, so that way I could see if I missed any inserters, but I just powered as I went. It's a really hard habit to break. Now with all that built, I could move on to automation. A good start is gear assemblers with space for science and some belt production. I even upgraded that dropped item trick to be compulsion resistant. For the low price of one inserter next to every assembly machine, it'll drop items on the ground automatically. This way, if I pick it up, another item replaces it in a few seconds tops. The lack of a placement pattern meant I had to flail my mouse around to find chests, but that was better than flailing around the entire base. Side note, chat is the biggest troll, but they're also incredibly observant. When you've turned off graphics and somebody still says, hey, you're missing an inserter 5th from the bottom, what do you even do? Enable graphics to check? Oh right, I can do that now. Okay, so they were lying, but how cool would it have been if they were right? Although they were right about something, the furnace lane wasn't fully running. Inserters are a pretty common cause there, so obviously it was a drill issue. If the ore belt is sparse, it's either a power issue or a drill issue, so it should have actually been pretty obvious. Easy fix once I tracked down the miners. In my defense, I wasn't thinking clearly. Biters are getting close, and I was unprepared. I really needed gun turrets, but I guess I didn't handcraft enough science for them earlier. Well, that gave me a bit of time before gun turrets were ready, so I fed my drills and went Paul Bunyan on some trees. There's one tool that would have been super useful here, but I couldn't bring myself to use it quite yet. The deconstruction planner. It's supposed to be used with bots to mark things for deconstruction, obviously, but it does that with a big ol' X. This felt against the spirit of the run. Especially since I could have also used it to highlight my base with the only caveat that it stalls the entire base. And eventually it has the caveat that it destroys the entire base. Okay, yeah, it's probably good that I didn't get into the habit of using it to control F my base. So no new tricks, but at least gun turrets finished researching and I could automate labs. They just didn't fully work at first. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why, but it's pretty apparent here. This last one was a ghost, which meant it was not only invisible, but it was also invisible. This does bring up the question of why I ghosted them in the first place, and honestly, it doesn't do much. Ghosts are essential later since they mark stuff for bots to build, but at the moment, they're just spacers or reminders. This usually works great, but in this case, it felt like I built it, and it looked like I built it, so I thought I built it. What matters is I eventually figured it out, got all the labs running, and could finally automate coal to power. Belt locking prevented any major placement errors here because it's hard for the belt to be placed too poorly when it's limited one direction. Of course, the power poles can block every placement, and there are still many ways to break smart belting, so I wasn't completely safe. Poorly timed pipettes, frame perfect rotations, or even tapping control all break the belt locking mechanic for some reason, so I had to be careful to avoid those. Honestly though, these annoyances have been worth it. With resources moving around, the base looks pretty darn cool. Look at these little beans jumping around as I build turrets. It's like the whole thing has come to life. Now, let's make more life. Wait, not like that. Anyway, it's time to automate copper in the worst possible way. It would have been easier if the coal came from the left, but I didn't want to mess too much with my already functioning iron lane. Instead, I jammed the belt in the corner and tried to make it work. Ugly, but hey, it worked well enough for me to take a break and fight some biters. It felt odd playing with biters since I typically disable them unless they add something unique to the run, and oh boy were they unique. Turns out, biters are entities, which means they're invisible. And so are the bases, and the worms, and the spitters, and the acid, but I didn't notice that one for a long time. I mean, taking damage out of nowhere, a green target menacingly floating towards me, it would be crazy to not include them this time around. Once you damage a biter though, it becomes visible. Kind of. Permanently. Until they die. And look, we can even mark our course by clicking on the dialog box. See, it was a demonstration. I'm not bad at fighting biters. Hey, the bases are cleared. That should keep me safe for a bit, which allowed me to focus on whatever I was building here. Seriously, do you know what I'm building? Cause I don't. Oh right, we were building smelting outputs and a weird direct-fed science assembler, which looked exactly how I wanted. Yeah. You know what? I think it's about time we went over the ultimate strategy for this run. Denial. If you think you didn't make a mistake, you didn't. And if you can't see it, you definitely didn't. Right, y'all? For example, we can pretend that this underground to fix the copper lane wasn't horribly awkward to build because of how bad I was at reading the direction. Sure, they create dashes to show which way they're facing, but undergrounds are like USBs. You just gotta try every direction until it works. We can also pretend that I didn't forget about some random copper furnace in the middle of my iron lane, and we can pretend that I didn't have any spacing issues because of it. Because it didn't happen, right? Jokes aside, I was getting pretty decent at this Factorio memory game. At some point, I needed one lab and just knew where it was. Unfortunately, memory wasn't everything. I went back to expanding smelting and just everything was already off. The cables were a mess, I was missing some inserters, and the furnaces were misaligned. Oh wait, I know what to do. Oh wow, everything is perfect and there's no mistakes here. Look at that, we even finished it. How's that? By this point, I've noticed something familiar. Rotating belts was unreliable since you never truly knew the rotation. To make up for that, I kept using the pipette tool since I generally knew what I was standing near. This felt remarkably similar to the mouse-only run at points, and it's not a flashback I wanted to remember. Anyway, it was time to prep for science, and that included a starter mall. I resisted the urge to power green chips, so the icons gave me a rough idea of what I had placed. After that, I needed more belt and inserter production, which I did not resist the urge to power, and a gear copper belt for science, which required a risky lane crossing. That's everything we needed for red and green science, so there were just a few assemblers to place, a bunch of labs, and that's it. Factorio had been beaten. Okay, fine, there's a lot more, but it's a big milestone regardless. With labs running, we needed more power and of course more resources. This is where I realized how carried I was by resources being visible on the belt. I tried to build the smelting lane inputs before the miners, and I just never knew where the belt was unless I stood on it, so I had to give in and just build the miners first. According to chat, there was also some mixed mining here, and just here, have a listen. They noticed way faster than I did. What's the fancy job where you go into someone's house and you literally just rearrange their furniture? Last miner is mixed? Oh, wait, is it? Ah, thank you. That would be bad. How did they even notice? It was on screen for 15 frames, and need I remind you, invisible? Oh well, I got it fixed and now had multiple lanes of a single resource. A perfect time to debut the splitter, and oh boy was it cursed. It looked like a mirage, which was neat at first, but the resources clipping into each other just felt unnerving. I imagine this always happens, but is covered up by the visuals, and I don't like that I know this now. Let's just ignore the curse for the time being. With more resources, we could upgrade them all and even add a few more assemblers. At this point, I kind of just expected chat to point out mistakes to me, so I assumed it was right. I mean, they always do, and this is just a perfectly normal Factorio playthrough. It shouldn't be any different. Plus, is an invisible factory really that much different if people have a video on as background noise? At this point, I noticed map mode had icons enabled, and I probably could have used that to my advantage, but it felt too cheaty, so I just turned it off. That, and I had extreme tunnel vision while building, so I only noticed stuff in the dead center of the screen. Map mode didn't help with building either, which is the main thing I needed right now. I already knew I was in the middle of a steel lane, so it's not like the map helped me there. To keep inserter rotations consistent, I placed all the inserters in one direction first, and then powered them at the end. This worked great until I did the left side, which was powered by the right side, so I was less confident there. Failing to keep the left side unpowered wasn't quite as bad as building too close to the cliffs, which I really wanted to blame on textures, but yeah. Cliffs are visible. No excuses here, just mistakes. I wanted to build even more smelting lanes, but my inserter count was getting low, which was odd. I swear I upgraded my assembly machines and... I see. I didn't upgrade the outserters. Apparently blue and yellow are remarkably similar colors if the color is faint enough. Who knew? Let's just fight some biters while inserters craft. I still hadn't realized acid was invisible and just assumed I wasn't fighting spitters yet, so yeah, they got me. A small fishing trip before trying again seemed helpful. In this game, they're basically just healing potions. They're also a bit clear and have a tiny hitbox, but fortunately I have a ton of real life fishing experience, and know that flailing about mindlessly in the water is a very effective fishing strategy. By the way, that deconstruction trick I mentioned earlier would have worked wonders here. It even freezes fish in place, but it felt more like a last resort than anything, which I did use. I probably should have replenished some other resources too, since I had to find my ghost in the middle of a biter base with nothing but a fish for a weapon. Hopefully that slightly embarrassing fight from earlier keeps them at bay long enough for me to work on oil, which I was really dreading by the way. Of course, it wouldn't be oil without getting sidetracked by doing literally everything I possibly can to delay the trip. That includes base upgrades, some more copper, and a stone lane. In the process, I ran into a bit more mix mining, but it was powered so quickly that it was easy to spot. I was starting to get a sixth sense for poorly placed objects, but it seemed to have its limits. It barely even helped when it came to finding oil pipes, because those were just awful. The resource sliders are pretty high, so I didn't have to travel far, fortunately, but I really should have just used regular pipes. Undergrounds are annoying to place at the best of times, so when I accidentally let go of left click, it took longer than I'd like to admit to find the pipe, but I was able to go and place the pump jacks. Oil's not all bad though. There's this little visual bug that helped a lot. A small blue line that appeared next to filled pipes, a couple tiles offset, which is almost useful for finding pipes. Admittedly, the alignment issue made it less useful, but the general location of pipes was still pretty nice. The plastic, on the other hand, not nice. The buffer let me delay future oil expansion, which I'm all about, but boy did I struggle to split the lanes. I think a chatter summed it up best when they asked, "What fresh hell is this?" To which I can only reply, it's a perfectly normal Factorio playthrough, which is true enough by my standards. Anyway, plastic seemed functional, so it was time for circuits, but something was in the way. My mortal enemy, this random radar. Remember that time I knew exactly where a lab was? Well, this radar was the exact opposite. I swear I constantly ran into it and kept moving it to upcoming build locations, but I could not figure out where else this happened, so I'm convinced I dreamed the whole thing. Minor existential crisis, but I swear it's real. Putting that aside, I managed to build more green chip assemblers afterwards in the same way as before, and then moved on to red chips. They were kind of a breeze. Admittedly, they're the easiest part of blue science. Straight lines, one inserter type, and basically no rotations except the belt. But hey, pretty darn clean. I was still relying on buffers at this point, which meant it's time for, you guessed it, another expansion. Otherwise, everything will stall when science picks up again. That means I also needed power for those expansions, which I forgot to connect. This seems to be a recurring theme in my runs, but at least there's an excuse this time. After that was all fixed, the base seemed to be running pretty nicely, and honestly, even without machines, it's just so satisfying to watch this game. Sometimes you just gotta stop and smell the roses. What you don't want to smell is the gears grind in my head. I was thinking real hard to figure out how to rotate this corner, and those gears were smoking. If I was an underground... Okay, it's facing to the left right now, so I need to rotate it clockwise? Yeah, I figured it out at some point, but my pipes got mixed up at some point, and I could not mentally realign them. Also, please try and ignore the timer as I build the sulfur plant. Trying to figure out how to use underpipes here made this take like 3 minutes for a 10-second walk to water. And you know what? I'm about 3 hours in and I realized something. This was a mistake. Not the sulfur design or anything, just all of it. Case in point, you know how I said 3 minutes to figure out water? Yeah, no. Turns out it was actually 7 because my water broke, and I thought it was just way shorter because my script outline just assumed it had to be done if it took this long. Eventually, we did finish sulfur, and the red chips seemed to be working too. So the last thing we needed for Blood Science was the assemblers themselves. Technically, we also needed engines, but with direct feeding, I just think of them as one unit since it works so great. Unless it's offset, then it doesn't work so great. Trees were in the way, so I misplaced all the assemblers, but a well-aimed grenade cleared them and marked my machines to make them easier to find. The original mall had all the resources for engines, so all we needed were some inserters, and voila! One step closer to bots. Assuming Blue Science was working, of course, which it was, although the belts were entirely the wrong direction. Then it ran slowly due to a refinery shortage, which was a simple fix, except I missed a pipe. So yeah, it didn't help. If you can't tell, the biggest problem this whole run has just been making really minor mistakes with no good way to double check if things are working. Thanks to that mistake, there was a bit of time to kill again while waiting for research, even with extra labs to recover, so it's time for more biters. And we've got some massive bases over here, all the way up to behemoths, massive swarm of enemies, dozens spawn dozens of worms. My struggles were justified. I know we spent a lot of time walking to these huge fights, but I didn't have my license yet. We're just walking. Which was smart, because I kept walking right through a forest on my way to clear the base. You know what, Blue Science and safety seemed like a good stopping point for that day, so I came back the next day with even more invisible stuff. That's right, our timer was now invisible. Okay, fine. I just forgot I wasn't using the timer mod and didn't open my external one, so sorry about that. If you ever wonder how long a build is taking, you can safely assume it's taking way longer than it should. Like this copper lane, the drills themselves took a tad longer than they should have, but the belts took way longer. Now seems like a good time to explain why exactly undergrounds happen tricky. I don't think I'll be able to top my explanation for the run itself. You know, to give an example, when you place an underground, and you Q-pick the end one, it doesn't actually rotate your cursor if it's like a half placement, like this. So when you Q-pick it, you then have not rotated your mouse, so you go to place the next one, and it's facing the wrong way. See? Does that make sense? Hopefully the footage helped. Okay, fine. The gist of it is that there are 8 states in underground in existence, so the pipette tool doesn't match the underground direction, but rather the underground half. Not a big deal when you can see it and fix it, but it's problematic here when it's so easy to flip belts or place half undergrounds. Fortunately, with a bit of patience, you can wait for the resources to disappear and reappear as confirmation, but I don't have patience. Clearly my patience was wearing thin and cliffs weren't helping, so I needed some cliff explosives. Creative name, I know. Unfortunately, they require me to build more water, and you remember how that went. It went just as bad this time around. Arguably worse since I broke plastic this time too, but at least future expansions will be easier without cliffs. All we needed to do was hook up that water and we're good to go. Now we can move on to the final phase of the run, bots. I'm still not sure if bots are helpful here. On the one hand, they let me copy and paste builds, but on the other, do I really want to copy this? Regardless, I needed the electric engines either way. Lube could wait a bit since I wasn't ready for another fluid, so I prepped the engines and then immediately ran out of things to delay lube, so yeah. Advanced oil was a hot mess. First off, tanks. They have 2 rotations. Great, that makes it easier. However, they have no arrows and no real way to tell if they're connected unless you can actively see the fluid level changing. What I should have done was just surround it with pipes, but I didn't think of that in time. Advanced oil also needed water, so you know what? We'll just say connecting water went about as well as the other 2 times. We don't need any more details. The loop connected well though. No idea what made that one different. We also needed batteries for bots, which meant there was another water connection for sulfuric acid. See anything wrong? Yep, it's broken. Again. Pipes are awful and I should have just used barrels. Hopefully fixing it wasn't another 10-minute venture this time. Who am I kidding? Of course it was. We spent more than 40 minutes placing water pipes this entire run. But once that was hooked up, batteries started working and it was only one quick frame build until bots. Their first task after making them all bot compatible was to expand furnaces by duplicating the prettiest one. I could get the general idea of what I was copying thanks to the outlines, and I could see the quantities copied near the cursor, so that's something. Next, I used the little dashes for underground belts to align things, assuming the undergrounds were correct, and finally I pasted it 5 more times with nothing but a hope and a prayer. While bots are useful, they do take a lot of power, so surprise surprise, we needed more power. This is my first time placing large amounts of ghost belt this run. In other words, no items were on the belts to act as guides. It went well. Both lanes were aligned properly and it actually worked. It felt great. Power even looked connected this time. Still rolling on that coal high, I connected imaginary copper patches with more imaginary belts and even felt confident enough to copy paste that lane onto a new patch. Then I had to make a new iron lane which pushed my luck a bit too far. That last one didn't go quite as smoothly. It cut directly through the power lane which was occupied. Not only that, but there was some mixed coal mining here which I didn't notice until it broke my furnace lane. This is basically all the furnace lanes and power I needed for launch though, so it was time to refine it. Let's start with chips galore. Even with bots building things, the process was generally the same. Leave things unpowered while placing inserters, and then power everything at the end. With bots, we could just build one set, copy it up a bunch, and then duplicate it. I use map mode a lot here, so replays just look like me standing in one spot for a long time, so here's a bunch of clips of me connecting the belts. I can't show exactly how poorly they were placed due to the missing graphics, but I can show you this aftermath, which I think gets the point across. I also added some more oil refineries and some plastic plants, which completely invalidated all that time I spent on the buffer earlier. While bots built those few hundred entities, I planned my offense, this time with a car. I even managed to navigate past the trees without crashing on my way to crash into the base instead. Okay, that works. This push cleared out all the nearby enemies, so I should be safe for a while to build my base. While I'm safe, I can spend my time using up all those green chips. Some go into red chips, but most go into blue chips. These things eat a lot of green chips. Realistically, I didn't need this many since I'm not in any rush, but excess is the essence of Factorio. Plus, more machines equals more magical floating resources. Unfortunately, these blue chips needed sulfuric acid, which meant, yep, another fluid connection. You can guess how it went. After failing multiple times to attach the undergrounds, I managed to completely bork the pipe for like another half hour. This stalled the entirety of bot production, and I produced no bloom chips in the meantime. No wonder things were building so slowly. We also needed modules which were basically just blue chips without acids, so I produced them near each other and side swapped them to keep the lanes separate. Very reliable. And of course, we needed some buffers to help kickstart things later. Once those were done, the rest of the copper lanes went into low density structure. As long as you have all the input resources, it's pretty hard to mess these up. Now for science, and there were some nice gaps in the base to fit it. Anything that tessellates should have worked well since you only need to build a small block and copy it, but that doesn't work when you block all the undergrounds and have all the belts reversed. Yellow science was more straightforward, though I had to take a bit of a detour to grab blue chips and LDS. This part would have started a lot slower, but once again, chat came in clutch. They pointed out that LDS had an unpowered roboport. It's pretty hard to mess these up. Seriously, how are people so observant? Now that science is all running, I gotta say, these undergrounds look cursed. This is the first time I had used a long series of undergrounds, so the resources phasing in and out was almost worse than the splitters. Almost. This must have angered the biters too, because they were not having it. I grabbed my car and went on another mission. I decided to give in and try the deconstruction trick this time to highlight everything, and wow, I didn't hit a single tree thanks to it. Not like trees are my main problem anyway. I underestimated the size of the base, so I took a quick death warp back and decided to check on science instead. Assuming science is running decently, it seemed like a good time for a lab expansion. An ordinarily easy expansion, but for some reason it just felt off. With all the hitboxes, I couldn't tell which were poles and which were inserters, so I couldn't place it cleanly. My spatial awareness was not ready for this kind of run. Whatever, labs don't need to run well if production is low. Purple science was running on buffers, and it was about to run out. In an attempt to prevent this steel bottleneck, I made an overly sized steel expansion, which I promptly deleted because it was blocking the silo location. I can always add more steel later. Right now, I need the rocket control units. This first batch didn't seem enough, so I doubled it and gave it the good ol' "that looks correct" and went on my way. Okay, I should probably check on research again. Third time's the charm. It's still slow. I really should not have deleted that steel lane. Fortunately, I built too many iron lanes, so at least we had the resources for more steel immediately. All I had to do was reroute the spare plates, connect into the middle, and break the splitter in the process. Easy peasy. Wait, no, I wasn't supposed to break that. Thankfully, I had my handy dandy glasses which highlighted the belts and cleared trees in one fell swoop. Nice. Maybe a bit too nice since there's no longer a splitter, is there? Well, back to plan A. Denial. I'm sure it works. Alright, 2 out of 3 rocket parts down, science is fixed, that means it's rocket fuel time. Filled tanks have fluid indicators on the side, which was really helpful for finding light oil. And if I built rocket fuel close enough, I only needed a small amount of graphically glitched pipes. Making one long set of rocket fuel assemblers seemed like the smart thing to do since it limits the amount of connections that can break to just one, but I never said I was smart. That's why I built 3 sets and broke it in 3 locations. A very cursed rocket fuel build, truly. But you know what's more cursed? Breaking science. Again. Red chips weren't correctly sideloaded, so research still hadn't finished. If you haven't played before with just the goal of launching a rocket, let me tell ya, purple science sucks to speed up. It crafts slowly, so you need a bunch of assemblers, but it also uses a high throughput for like 4 different resources, so even buffers barely help. Your best bet would be to hand feed chests in various places, which we're definitely not doing while invisible, or to use red belt to increase the throughput, but we don't have that. This leaves us with the easiest option, hoping we mess something else up instead so we're not entirely science limited. Right, back to rocket fuel now that purple science is fixed, and oh great, another distraction, of much stronger enemies this time. We're up to the big boys now, so their spit is strong and we do not have much time left before my defenses are overwhelmed. I finally realized spit wasn't visible at least and managed to narrowly avoid losing after winning this battle. Now we have 2 choices. We could add a wall and some more defenses, or we can make a rough wall out of assemblers, which is way more expensive, way weaker, and just generally worse than an actual wall. Once we were safe, I decided to check on research again, and it finally seemed to be chugging along nicely for the first time ever. As long as the biters don't get to our buffers, we'll be able to launch soon. Just had to grab a bunch of stuff to build the silo. I had the first 4 already, processing units, pipes, electric engines, and steel, but I still needed the concrete. I built this at the edge of my base, which was a very close call by the way. It was the prime target for biters here, and we almost lost it multiple times. I then crafted some beacons since they save a couple minutes on the launch. Unfortunately, I forgot the inserters so they weren't crafting for a while. I should have seen it sooner. Lastly, I came up with a masterful strategy to hold out until launch. I call it defending my base for the first time. Just kidding. Of course we didn't. It's called pretending to defend my base for the first time while filling the silo instead. All that's left is to wait. And wait. And wait. As the seconds ticked down, biters came full force. Against all odds, the assembler walls actually held out. I only needed a small amount of our base to survive, just enough to launch the rocket. And eventually, our denial had paid off. Everything was fine, and our base was safe, and I could narrowly escape while our power plant was attacked. In just under 8 hours, I beat the prettiest Factorio mod to date, and I even made it out with some of my sanity intact. I really had a lot of fun with this one, and I'll be doing more dumb stuff like this, so be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out. I also stream these live at twitch.tv/antipatient, so don't be afraid to come say hello. Thanks so much for watching. Just staying this far is a huge help, but if you'd like to support me more, I just started a Patreon and Ko-fi where I'll be uploading outtakes and other behind the scenes. Peace.